Thanks, guys. I'm pretty sure that I'm not the fastest or the toughest or the most experienced ultramarathon runner here in this room. But if there was a podium for loves it the most, then I would definitely be on it every single time. I've had the privilege of some very unique running adventures all over the world, including a really cool race in West Africa called Col d'Esprit. I was the first white woman in its 35-year history running from almost sea level to the top of the 13,500-foot Mt Cameroon and all the way back down again. And among a field of 300 Africans in which I stood out a little, I came close to dead last. But I didn't care, because just being there was the raison d'etre. I know I'm going to run out of years on my life well before I run out of places to explore, so I rarely do something twice. But I have a strange love affair with a mountain race in Italy. The Tour de Géant has only existed for 2 years, but I've been there both times, and I will go back again. So what is it about this race that makes really normal people like me do really silly things like go back? Well, it's 330 kilometers, it climbs 80,000 feet and back down again, and over 25 mountain passes. And the cool part is that it's unstaged, which means the clock never stops, and so you don't sleep very much. So my answer is that it's just plain badass. And it is very European. If you've ever raced in Europe, you'll know what I'm talking about. It is a fiesta of white see-through spandex, shaved legs, and colorful accents and wine. And in fact, every aid station, and there are over 40, serves beer and wine. You also get to see some things in Tour de Géant that I'm pretty sure you would never see at a North American race. This year, a friend of mine came across a man with his pants down around his ankles, standing at a water trough, giving his testicles a bit of a splash splash to cool them down. And they exchanged a glance that suggested that he didn't think there was anything wrong with washing his privates in the drinking water with all the world to see. It took me 130 hours last year, and I won't lie. It was amazing to cross the finish line of such an epic race. It was a true journey, but it hadn't been easy. I had a meltdown with just 100 kilometers to go, and a little bit of an issue with an overly keen inflammatory response. This is what 100 hours of running does to a person. But I don't want to talk about that. I actually want to talk about this year's race, because it was a very different experience for me. Sure, the race booze was still flowing, and the Euro running fashion was still shocking, and the mountains hadn't gotten any smaller. But for me, it ended differently. This year, I didn't come back with the almost quit story or the podium spot that I was secretly hoping for. Instead, Tour de Géant gave me a big Italian kick in the pants. The first day was hot, and despite being Australian, I don't know what this was all about, I began suffering with stomach and salt issues on just the second climb. Of course, I pushed on into one of the toughest nights I've ever experienced in racing. The rain was coming down in sheets, and I was high in the mountains in a quickly deteriorating state. I normally welcome suffering, but otherwise I wouldn't do these things. But just 22 hours into the race, I collapsed in an aid station, and instead of waiting to recover, which would have been the normal thing to do as an ultramarathon runner, and then joining the back of the pack, I actually let them cut off my timing band, and I quit. But here's the thing, I never thought I was a quitter. I'm not quite sure what happened out there, but what I do know is that I found myself sharing this body with some kind of stranger who seemed to be sticking around. I was eventually transferred back to Courmayeur and dropped off in an empty parking lot out the back of the recreation centre. The town was quiet because the hundreds of athletes and race volunteers and supporters that filled the streets with the energy were all out in the race having fun somewhere. And I remember it was a perfect morning, and I noticed the contrast between the beautiful, calm day and my very gloomy mood. I sat down on my race bag all alone and wondered what on earth I was going to do next. It was Tuesday, and I was not expecting to be back here until Friday morning. I mean, no one shows up to a big race with a contingency for quitting. I didn't have a hotel, and I'm not much of a tourist, and I didn't even want to walk into the village because I knew I had a big "did not finish" across my forehead. And so I sat there for quite a long time, like at least an hour, just kind of waiting for my life to improve. I knew I was acting like a putz, but I needed to sit down with my failure just for a little while. And then something really cool happened. I grew up and I got over myself. First, I realized that on a scale of bad things that have happened to me in this life, this was pretty minor. And in fact, there wasn't much bad about this situation at all. I was sitting at the base of Mont Blanc, surrounded by the Alps, and I was in Italy, for goodness sake. Most people couldn't even dream of a week spent in Italy with nothing to do. So I checked into what I called Hotel DNF. It was a homeless shelter for quitters, and it was filled with gymnastics mats and army blankets and self-pity in the back of the basement of the recreation center. And at no cost, it was much cheaper than the expensive hotels in town. I spent about 8 hours recovering, and then I took myself down to the tourist office to buy a trail map. And I was like a kid in a candy store when I saw how many hundreds of kilometers of trails there were for me to explore. I mean, Italy is a running playground. Check it out. What I rediscovered in those post-DNF days was that I just love to run. And I replaced my disappointment with pleasure as I spent the rest of the week disappearing into the mountains by myself and heading wherever the trails led. I didn't microanalyze my failure to finish or dwell on how it might or might not have made me a better athlete, or console myself with the fact that it probably happens to all of us eventually. I just ran, overwhelmed with the gratitude for the ability to do so in such a beautiful place. As athletes and adventurers, I think that sometimes we get so obsessed with our race goals and expedition agendas that we forget to love the very essence of the thing that we do. Well, I did anyway. So, I don't recommend quitting. Even if you have a good reason, it still sucks. But I do recommend taking every chance to remember why we love the things that we do and be grateful for the fact that we can do them. And for you runners out there, I recommend a certain race in Italy. And I hope that I'll see some of you there next year with me.